In 2019, I gave a rave review to the card game Mandala by Trevor Benjamin, Brett Gilbert, and Lookout Games. This is an abstract card game design in which you are collecting cards to score points, and mandalas have nothing to do with it other than you being able to look at something pretty instead of cards that are simply a plain color. I can understand why you'd want to do something like this. You have the choice to go one way or the other. Why not make something that is attractive and fun to look at? That approach has again been taken in 2021 for Mandala Stones, a 2 to 4 player game by designer Filip Głowacz and publisher Board and Dice. Let me show you how this works. Here are the components of Mandala Stones set up and ready to play. Before we began, I drew the 96 stones 4 at a time from the bag and placed them on the starting locations on the shared game board. The stones come in 4 colors, and there are 2 mandala patterns found on these stones, and these patterns are also visible on the 4 artists, with 2 of each pattern showing on the artist that start on these locations. On a turn, you are either going to pick stones from the board and place them on your personal scoreboard. Each player has one of these. Or you are going to score stones from your board and place them on this shared path. I have no stones to score, so for my first turn, and really many turns probably, I will be picking stones. And to do that, you choose any artist and you move it to any open location, which are marked by the circles. You cannot go here, even though people inevitably want to do that. I go to a location, I look at the pattern on the artist that I move, and I can collect stones of the matching pattern around it, so this one I cannot take. However, if an artist is adjacent to a stone, a different artist that is, I cannot take that stone. You're not going to snatch it from another artist's hands. So I can take these 2 stones here because they match the pattern showing on this artist. I can collect them in clockwise order, and I have to choose one to be the bottommost stone. So I go here, I go clockwise and collect here, and then I take these stones and I place it on one of the 5 locations on my board. Now, why I would do that is because they score in different ways, but we'll get to that in a moment. The next player goes, they're going to move something. Let's say they go here, and they collect these 2. They put them somewhere. I've got 3 stones here. If this was a 2-player game, I would go again. I would collect these 3 stones, again, picking them up in an orientation and placing them somewhere. And let's say someone else takes a turn. I'm going to make bad turns here because I'm moving somewhat randomly. And here, to go here and here, I don't get this one again. Each time you pick stones from the game board, they must go in an empty location on your personal board. So I can pick stones again because I have 2 spots open, or I could score. When you score in one of 2 ways. You can choose as many stacks as you wish and score the top stone from each of them, but you get only 1 point each, which means I get 3 points, and then I place those stones in whatever order I wish on this spiral path. That's not very good. Alternatively, you can choose a color that you have at least 2 of on the top of your stacks, and you score those stones. All the stones of that color. And the points you get vary depending on the stack and the location of the stone. So in this case, the stack scores 1 point for each color in the stack plus 1. So this red is worth 3 points. In this stack, the point value of the stone depends on the height of the stone in the stack. The bottom one here is worth 1. The second one is worth 3. So I get 6 points for these 2 stones. Double what I would get if I removed 3 stones. And now I've set myself up to score yellow on my next turn. I've lessened the value of this. This is only worth 1 point. This is worth only 2 points now. But I will score 3 at once. This stone, the value of this stone on top, depends on the number of different heights I have currently on my board, and I have 3 heights. A stack of 3, a stack of 1, a stack of 0. So if I score again on my next turn, this is worth 3 points, this is worth 2 points, this is worth 1, that's another 6 points, and I cover a +1 space, so I get 7 points. I could score in my next turn by scoring 1 point for this lone purple, but that seems like a terrible idea. Better to score more at once. All 3 of these spaces score based on the heights of the stones with different values for the different heights. So you're going to keep alternating between those, picking and scoring as you wish, unless of course all 5 places are filled, in which case you must score on your turn. And players continue taking turns until the stones reach or pass the location on the path based on the number of players in the game. So we're going to keep placing stones in a 2-player game. When we hit here, we complete the round so that each player has the same number of turns. And then we're done, except for scoring 1 of our secret objective cards. We're each going to get 2 cards at random. We score at most 1 of them, and the values of those range from 6 to 10 points. And they do things like having a particular pattern visible on your board. In this case, this pattern is the only pattern visible on my board, so I would score 7 points if this were what my board looked like at the end of the game. This one, if you have at least 3 blue stones on your board or more blue than each other player, you score 7 points. So you got options on what to do, and that's important because it's much harder to have more than each other player in a game with 4 players than a game with 2. So you have the option too of just having at least 3 blue stones. The other types of scoring, 1 for each color, 3 yellow, 3 purple, have exactly 1 stone, or 2, or 0, or 3, or the other pattern. There you go. You've seen all the objective cards. You see the basics of how to score. It's very straightforward. And then you see who has the most points and wins. There's a quick overview of Mandala Stones, which I now played 8 times on our review copy from Board and Dice, multiple times with 2, 3, and 4 players. And I played the game so many times in part because I liked it, and in part because I wasn't really sure how much I liked it. I had some reservations about different issues with the game, and so I was curious to explore it more and discover what I was having issues with, because in general, this type of game is exactly up my alley. It's a highly tactical game with short rules, a relatively short playing time, in which you are trying to make clever choices, put things together, try to maximize whatever you're doing, ideally scoring and then scoring again and then scoring again, and getting as much as you can out of something by setting up things the right way. You generally don't want to do the score 1 option because you're already getting a minimum of 1 point anyway whenever you do score. So picking 1 or 2 stones off to get a point is generally not what you want to do, except possibly to steal a bonus +1 or +2 spot from an opponent. Winning scores have generally been in the low 50s. So 1 and 2 points is not much, but of course if I have that instead of you, especially in a 2-player game, that's much better for me. So maybe I do want to do that, and ideally I'm setting things up at the same time for a more profitable score. So it all seemed like it should be ideal. You got the hidden objective, so you got something at the end to work for, something to drive what you're doing. Everything seemed like it should be there, and yet I kept having reservations. And now that I've played enough times, I can explain what those are. And maybe you'll disagree. Maybe things will work perfectly for you that I have issues with. But I thought I'd talk about them just because it looks at elements of game design in general. And it's kind of interesting just to see those things looked at a little more baldly or openly in the context of a specific game. So Mandala Stones inevitably is going to have comparisons to Azul. And I'm going to make them as well. In this video, I'm contributing to the problem by putting the 2 head-to-head, but it's kind of inevitable, given that they're both abstract games, 2 to 4 players, in which you are picking up stones and placing them on something to score points. They don't need themes or particular looks, but they both kind of have the same things going on. But Azul does things successfully and better than I find them done in Mandala Stones. So I'm going to talk about them in comparison. Ideally, you already know Azul. If not, hopefully I can explain things well enough that you can understand what I'm talking about. So part of the issue with the game is the pace of scoring and the pace of play. So Azul has something where you are going to be collecting stones and then you're putting them in a 5x5 grid and you score based on what the stone you just place in your grid is adjacent to. Ideally, you're making connected lines and columns because a stone in isolation is not worth very much. But if you put it together with other things, then it's more valuable. And you can have each color appear only once in a row or column, so you have restrictions on what you're trying to do. But ideally, you put things together, and over the course of the game, you're going to be scoring more each time you're doing something. So you have this rise to the tension, the sort of feel of the game starts very small, and then it grows over time so that the later things go, generally, the more points you score for whatever you're doing. And it feels more dramatic. It feels like you're definitely building towards something. And ideally, you hit the end of the game when someone has a complete row before others, so that you have some control over the pace of things. And you've been ramping up and can score when it's going to be best for you. Mandala Stones doesn't have that. You're going to have this ebb and flow of stacks of stones where you score, and as I demonstrated, that may reduce what you're getting in the future because now you have fewer colors in the one stack, or the heights become the same, and it reduces the possible value of what you're getting. There's one stack where you score, I believe, 6-4, I can just look at it, 6-4, 2, and 1. So you need all 4 stones in order to maximize what you're getting in that location. And then as you pull them off, things just get less valuable over time. And so I get it. You're rewarded for getting a full stack of 4 stones, but that doesn't happen that often in the game because of the restrictions that you have when you pick up stones in the first place, which again are sensible restrictions. You don't want people to just freely do whatever, but you pick up the stones only if it matches the pattern and is not adjacent to another artist. So typically, you max out at 3 stones when you're picking them up. I think in 8 games, maybe we had 4 or 5 instances total where someone would get 4 stones. And that brings up another issue with the game. Let's look at the board again. Here's the board where I left it after taking a few random moves for my demonstration turns. Again, you're going to pick one of the artists. You've got 5 locations to move to. You have 4 artists to possibly move. Sometimes it doesn't matter because the patterns are the same. If I move this artist to the center, I'm going to get this one. And if I move this one to the center, I would get the same one. But sometimes it does make a difference who you move based on the stones that are available or that you're opening up by no longer occupying that location. So that makes a difference. If I move this one here, I would get only this purple. If I move this one here, I would get these 2. All right. So there's some basic choices of what you're trying to do. However, we often, repeatedly, every game, multiple times, would come into a situation like this, where I took stones off the top, and the stones that you revealed now all have the same pattern. If I move this away, the next player is going to go here and they pick up 4 stones, which I don't want to do. So I'm not going to move that. I will do anything else other than move this artist, because whatever I would pick up with this artist, I could pick up with this one instead. So I have a choice of what to do. Or I just have these 2 guys. And fine, I can only pick up 2 here, but I could pick up 2 with this same one, and I don't open this up for the other player. And that pattern repeated over and over again in multiple games. We had one 4-player game where we ended up with 2 artists in the corners that had gone there once because the artists don't start there, and then they had revealed 3 or 4 matching patterns, and we just never moved them for the rest of the game. So the entire rest of the board had pretty much been taken by us, but only 1 or 2 stones at a time, and these just sat here. No one wanted to open that up in movement, so it felt very stagnant because your whole goal is just not to let other people profit. You are not getting enough of a reward to go elsewhere, to give someone else even more. The only way to avoid that would be in a two-player game if the other player had filled their board. If they had filled all 5 stacks on their board, well, you know they have to score on their next turn, so I could move this on my turn, assuming I have an open space. That player then scores, and then I can move back on my turn, and now I'll pick up all 4 of these stones for myself. That was the only way to avoid that situation where things just stopped moving on the board in an interesting manner. The two-player game of Mandala Stones was more interesting because you could more easily play off what the other person was doing. You could see whether they were going to be forced to score, and you know you'd have 2 pick turns in a row, assuming, of course, you had 2 stacks open, or you could just focus more on the colors they're doing and trying to score. But there's enough options on the board that you typically couldn't cut off everything a person would do. If someone wanted to score red, there were generally 2 or 3 different options for them to pick up red stones. So you couldn't block them completely. You're just trying to maximize what you're doing and then not let them get too much by opening up something for them. And this was a real sticking point and something that stood out with Azul. So Azul works similarly in that each turn you are going to be picking stones from one of the available factories or the center board. You must do that on a turn, and you know that's going to happen, and there's going to be progression in the game, and possibly you're going to open things up to other players. If you pick stones from a factory, you only take tiles of the same color, and everything else on that factory goes into the center pool, and someone that might enrich the possible choices of someone else in that central pool. But you could also hurt someone that way because they had space for only 3 stones and now of a certain color, and now you made 5 stones of a certain color, and if they take that, well, now they're going to be punished. You have an ability to hurt them in addition to possibly helping them. And that's not the case in Mandala Stones because there's only plus side generally to picking up more stones in general. And so it felt a lot more like Mandala Stones was a feel-bad game in that I'm making choices that are possibly suboptimal for me because you're going to profit more off of them. And some games definitely have that design where that's intentional. A lot of Stefan Feld games, you are going to be punished for what you're doing if you don't do things the right way. But that's often a self-imposed punishment where I'm going to be hit with some negative for not collecting something or doing something or whatever. In this case, it's feel bad because you are going to score much more than me if I leave this open to you. So I'm just going to go and do this other thing. And then we both do the same thing, and then we end up with 1/3 of the board kind of untouched. So it felt weird. There's another element on the board too. The rules specify that when you pick up stones, you must choose a stone to start with and then go clockwise, and the stones will go in a stack with the first one you pick on the bottom of the stack. Okay, so I have to do this and this and this, and that's somewhat tedious to go around to do that. And it feels like it's arbitrary that you do it in that manner because in theory, you could choose what you want, and that's going to be the top of the stack. So if I could have the exact same order where I choose this one to be the top and I go counterclockwise, and it's much easier to pick up the stones because I just stack them up in my fingers as I go instead of having to do this 2-step process where I take them off and put them on my hand or I put them on the table. It's just more laborious. And just like, why make that choice? Why force me to pick up stones in a particular manner if the result is the same? Why not explain it the clearest way possible or the way that works with the least amount of effort? Or I pick up stones clockwise going topwise. If everyone is doing the same thing, I don't see the difference as to why one would be preferable to the other. But I take this, it's already in my hand, and I put it on the board. Done. Along the same lines, does it matter so much if I have to pick up stones in a certain order? If everyone were able to pick up stones in the order they wish, would that break the game? I'm not sure. I haven't played that way. I kind of want that just because often it felt like you had this moment, again, a feel bad moment where I wanted to have two red and red, purple, red, something like that. And actually, you can always pick up a red, purple, red. A red, purple, blue. Or I want red, blue, purple. But that would mean picking up the opposite direction. Why not allow that to allow for more combo scoring? If everyone is doing the same thing, that seems like it should work as well. Again, it's possibly me just throwing something out there that may or may not work based on the testing that they've done. But the stacking issue was definitely a thing that could have been cleaner to make it easier to handle all the bits. Another issue I had was with the objective cards. Now, I already mentioned during the explanation of the game, I can understand why you would have these two options to score 7 points, because it is far easier in a two-player game to know that I will have more yellow stones than each other player. I only have one person to watch out for, I can keep track of what they're picking up, I can more easily control what they're picking up, or at least respond to what they're doing, rather than in a 3 or 4 player game, where I have to look at each other person and then possibly I just want to shift and get this one instead. But it feels a little clunky. Just these two things welded together that, I don't know. It feels like an out, an easy way to say, well, yeah, we'll give them at least, they got 2 ways to get this. And moreover, you're going to have 2 objective cards. So surely you're going to score one of them. Okay? We'll cover your ground some way. Like, it feels a bit like an out to just make it easier for people to get something rather than rewarding them for what they've done. Yes, you have a target to shoot for, but it feels more arbitrary compared to the Azul bonus method where you get points for each completed column in your grid and row in your grid and set of 5 tiles of one color. Like, that's something solid you can do. No one can take that away from you. Where here it's not necessarily under your control. The color ones, possibly just because someone else is collecting something and, okay, I just want to make sure I lock in 3 yellow. If it were that, it's more straightforward. I can work for that, towards that from the beginning. I can pick up things with the yellow on the bottom with the idea that I'm just going to leave them there. Of course, then that stacks out of play for the rest of the game because you can't put something in that stack until it's empty. And so you have to score it out over time and then you can put more in there. But if I throw away my yellow, then possibly I don't get this at all. You also have these which reward you for getting an exact number of stones on your board, 0, 1, 2, or 3. But it didn't feel like they're worth different point values, but it didn't really feel like it was harder to have 1 stone than to have 2 or 3. It seems, again, somewhat arbitrary that you would have these point values attached to this. And also you have the issue where the end of the game is not necessarily under your control. Things don't always work out well where I can say, okay, I'm going to score, and then I'm going to have 2 stones left, and that will ensure that I get this bonus. Because the scoring is collective, and it doesn't always work out the way where you know when things are going to end. Especially in a game with multiple players, I can be looking at the board and saying, well, that person can score and they can score, and together they can end the game. So what choice do I want to make that will benefit me? And picking up stones probably does nothing unless I have a color bonus where I need a particular color to score. So, but if I score, then I'm going to remove stones from my board, which may make me lose a color bonus or the number stone bonus, because now I don't have the right number of stones on the board. Maybe I have 2 stones on the board and I just want to leave it there. If I score, I don't have 2. If I pick up some, I don't have 2. And it feels like it's out of my control to try to make that happen. It just is more difficult. And then that sort of difficulty is repeated with the color bonuses, or sorry, the pattern bonuses, where I need only a certain pattern showing on my board. If I already have all of that pattern on my board, I might not be able to score right at the end of the game to get a few final points, because then I'll reveal something of a different pattern and I'll lose 7 points in the process. So instead, my choices are limited to picking something up, which is nothing, because I'm not going to score on that. I was already getting the 7 points anyway, in theory, based on what I had on my board, and now I've just taken a null turn to stay where I am. It hasn't progressed me in any way towards anything. And so the cards work a little oddly in that they give you targets to shoot for, but they're kind of out of your control. And then, so as a makeup, they give you 2 of them. So ideally you hit 1 of them. It feels like, again, an arbitrary bonus almost. And that ideally you just get something and then can add that on. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but it adds to everything else where, you've got the goals that are not under your control. You got the arc of the game, which is just sort of this up and down pattern of I scored 5 and then I scored 6, or 6 and then 7 is in my example, and then I'll pick a few and then maybe I'll score 4 and then I pick and then I score 5 and it just oscillates back and forth. And often the end point is just like you removing a few stones at a time for points to try to get those last things because you know the game's going to end. So you don't have that storytelling rise that you would want to, where you have the introduction and then tension rises over the course of the game, and then you reach this peak where everyone's scoring a lot as you try to push towards the end and end at the opportune moment. Mandala Stones doesn't have that. It's just that up and down combined with the feel bad moments of me not wanting to take an action because you will profit more than me, especially in a multiplayer game with 3 or 4 players, because my next person, he's going to get 4 stones and then the other 2 get nothing as well. No one wants to make that action. So it creates this feeling where things just aren't progressing the way that I want them to. And I'm doing options and you're doing the best you can. And some games are all about doing the best you can. But this felt like it shouldn't be one of those. Or if it is, it needs to be more specific about what I'm being rewarded for based on what I do with this endgame bonus that is what I've done. But that would require some sort of different scoring method where we're not putting stones just on the path, which is not a mandala, by the way. It's a spiral, an arithmetic spiral or an Archimedean spiral, not a mandala. But I get rewarded because I've put in stones of certain colors, and maybe I hit targets that way. I'm rewarded for scoring blue, but then that would require a completely different scoring method for me to track what I've done in some manner. So there's all these different elements that worked in Azul, where sure, we're all picking stones, but I have more control over how I'm going to score and then what your choices are going to be. And here, I'm going to pick up the stones off the stack, and then I'm going to reveal something, and possibly then I reveal something that you can't take right away because there's an artist in that stack, but also you don't want to move that artist out, and so it just kills this area of the board. It just has all these different elements that make it seem like, I don't know. It works, but it's just doesn't really hit the things I want. And again, so I'm sort of stumbling here, but explaining also what I feel didn't really work. And maybe it would work for you. Lots of people have seemed to really enjoy the game, but I find all these different elements where I seem like I wanted different choices in how things work. Maybe you get to try, and you can leave your own opinion on what you think about the game as a comment. You already know what I think.